Open your Bibles, if you would, to Ephesians chapter 5. Ephesians chapter 5. Ephesians 5, I'd like to read again our scripture reading from this morning. Ephesians 5 and verse 15. Therefore be careful how you walk, not as unwise men, but as wise, making the most of your time, because the days are evil. So then do not be foolish, but understand what the will of the Lord is. Make the most of your time, Paul says in verse 16. This morning's sermon is the first of two lessons on parenting that Joe and I would like to share with you. Next week, Lord willing, Joe's going to be giving a lesson about parenting through the teenage years. And my sermon this morning is focused on those younger years. But this morning, we're going to be talking about the values that we need to teach our children. Now, certainly, we can't talk about all of the values that we need to teach our children. Time permitting, we're going to talk about 3 of them this morning. But our focus this morning is really on the younger ages, because it is in those early years of their lives that we must begin instilling these values. If we wait too long, then it just becomes increasingly more difficult to instill these values. I love what Paul says in verse 16 when he says, make the most of your time. I want to think about that idea with you for just a moment. How much time do we have with our children under our roof? And generally, we would say we have 18 years. We have from birth to 18, and it would be 19 years, I guess, if you count from 0 to 1. But let's say it's 18 years before our child either goes off to college or maybe goes out into the workforce. Some of you might be thinking, my child is 27 and he's still at home. And I don't think we have anybody. All right. So generally speaking, though, we have 18 years, right? Not really. Let's do a little math together. Don't you love mathematics? We'll keep it simple. Well, let's start with this. Children spend 6 years of that time asleep. 8 hours a day, sleeping, that's 1/3 of the day, and you multiply all of that out, and that equates to 6 years of that time that they're going to spend asleep. Now, they're under our roof, but there's no direct interaction. We're all asleep. So now that 18 has been reduced to 12. If our children leave home to go to school, whether it's public school or private school, they will be away from our direct parental influence. Now, here's where we have to do the more difficult math. So let's say that they are away at school for 8 hours per day, and they do that by 180 days per year. That's how many school days there are, so we're multiplying here. And they're going to do this for 13 years, from K through 12th grade. You multiply all of those numbers, and you come up with 18,720 hours that our children will spend away at school. In 1 year, 365 days times 24 hours in a day, there are 8,760 hours in 1 year. So let's divide 18,720 by 8,760, and you get 2.14 years in hours that our children will spend away at school. Did you follow all that math? Joe told me not to do that. He said, don't get up there and do all that. But by putting it on the chart, I think that helps us if we see it. So now let's add some of these numbers. 6 years asleep, a little north of 2 years away at school, And so in total, our children will spend a little bit over 8 years away from our direct influence over them. So really, that 18 years that we have them is really more like 10 in terms of direct influence. We have roughly 10 years of direct influence over our children. And so now that we are all sufficiently depressed and thinking, wow, I've never thought about it that way before, I think you see why Paul's expression in Ephesians 5 and verse 16 becomes so important. We've got to make the most of the time that we have. And in order to do that, we have to begin very young. So as we think about values that we need to teach our children, as I said, I've got 3 things I want to talk about. I'm going to spend considerably more time on the first point. We'll definitely get to the second point, and if time allows, we'll get to the third one, all right? All right, so let's launch into these together. The first value that we need to talk to our children about and instill within them is respect for authority. And everyone 60 and above said, amen, in your minds. Respect for authority. You know, even our lives as adults are governed by authority. We all are subject to all kinds of authorities. Civil, governmental, authorities in the office, in the workplace. We all have a boss that we answer to, that we are accountable to. Someone is always in charge. And that is true in every aspect of life. And most of the time, the person who is in charge is not me. Most of the time, the person who is in charge is not me. But there is one place where I am in charge, and that is my home. In matters of the family, parents are the authority. But in our culture today, over the last few decades, there has been a great shift that has taken place. It seems that authority no longer resides with the parents in the home, but authority has been given over to the children. It was trending that way when I was a child, culturally speaking. I am part of that wretched millennial generation that everyone maligns, and I think quite deservedly so. So while it was trending that way for me as a kid, it was not that way for me as a kid. You see, I grew up in the buckle of the Bible Belt, in the Tennessee Valley area. I know that all of the Southeast is considered to be the Bible Belt, South Carolina included, but folks, I was in the buckle, all right? And what that means is, in the Bible Belt, parents believe the Bible and they use the belt. That's what that means. Children are not supposed to be in charge. And I was not in charge when I was a child. But I went to school with some kids who, looking back on it, I think they were. I'm going with you to Isaiah chapter 3. Isaiah chapter 3. This is not a passage about parenting per se. But in this chapter, God is talking about how he is going to turn everything in Judah on its head. The people are being wicked and rebellious, and so as a judgment upon them, God is going to turn their world upside down. And I want you to notice one of the things that God says would be present if the world were turned upside down. Look with me at Isaiah chapter 3 and verse 4. I will make mere boys their princes, and capricious children will rule over them. And the people will be oppressed, each one by another, and each one by his neighbor. The youth will storm against the elder, and the inferior against the honorable. Do you see that God has brought about a great reversal there? He says that the inferior people are storming against the honorable. That's not the way it's supposed to be. He says at the end of verse 5 that the youth will storm against the elder. That's not the way it's supposed to be. And that's the point. God says, I'm going to bring about a judgment upon you where your world is turned upside down, where everything is backwards. And included in that is verse 4, where the children are running the nation, where children are running the show. And I know this is not about parenting, but the point is children ought not to be in charge. That's not the way it's supposed to be. And yet that is the way that it is in modern America. I'm going to Ephesians chapter 6 now. We were just in chapter 5. Let's go to chapter 6 and let's look at every child's favorite verse. Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 1. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Modern America reads this in reverse. Parents, obey your children because this keeps the peace. That's how modern America reads Ephesians 6:1. Parents, obey your children. And this transition of authority from parents to the children, it manifests itself in a number of different ways. In one of the ways that I see it manifested, the kids' opinions and preferences are given equal weight, if not more, to the opinions and the preferences of the parents. Let the children decide has become the mantra of good parenting in our culture. I recently heard a story about a woman, a mother, who was complaining to the middle school principal about the school's rule about cell phones. It was a big problem in the school. The kids, they all had cell phones. And these are middle school kids we're talking about here. They all had cell phones. They're all texting in class. They're playing games. They're on Instagram. They're doing TikTok and all this. So the school just came out and said, all right, here's the rule. It's very simple. No cell phones allowed during class time. That seems like a simple rule, right? Why would anybody push back against that simple, basic, kind of agreeable, it seems, rule? But this mother calls into the principal, and she was so upset about this. And she is saying, I must be able to text my daughter during the school day, which I'm thinking, okay, hang on. You send her to school to learn, but you are distracting her text. Okay, let's put that aside for a second. She says, I must be able to text my daughter during the school day so that I can ask her what she wants me to cook her for dinner. Folks, I'm going to give you one guess as to how many times my mother asked me what I wanted for dinner. If I showed up at the dinner table and I said, oh, we're eating this? My mother and my father would have said, it's either that or it's nothing. What do you want? I think we see authority transferred to the children when parents propose everything as a question to their children. I've caught myself doing this. Maybe you have too. Would you like to go and clean your room? Why don't you eat your vegetables? Hey, listen, what do you think about putting your shoes on so we can leave Johnny's house and go home? Stop doing that. When we propose everything as a question, what we are doing is letting our kids make the choice. We are letting them be the authority. This doesn't work. There are times when Stacy and I will do this and we will correct each other. One of us will say, hey, why don't you go upstairs and brush your teeth before bed? And the other one will say, hey, Daddy didn't mean that as a question. Go do it. What are you going to do if you say, hey, why don't you go upstairs and brush your teeth before bed? And your child says, no, I don't want to do that. Give commands. Give simple, direct commands. It shows them who is in charge. It's our job as parents to teach our children right from wrong. It's not the school's job. It's not the government's job. The church has a role in it, but ultimately it is our job as parents to teach them right from wrong. And this presents, I think, a popular misconception that parents have. There are many parents who see a struggle between being strict and being loving. We want to teach them right from wrong, but that oftentimes requires strict rules and boundaries that we put into place. And when we give strict rules and boundaries, it might seem to make us unloving towards our children. And parents see a tension between these two things, a difficulty, a clashing between these two ideas. They feel that you can be one or the other. You can be strict or you can be loving, but you can't be both. Don't accept that false dichotomy. That is a false choice. It is not an either-or choice. Parents, we must be strict and loving. They can go together. And I think the best way to illustrate that is to look at our Father in heaven. Is God strict? He demands obedience from his people. But isn't he loving at the same time? Doesn't he show us how to put those two ideas together? Let's go to the Old Testament. Let's go to Deuteronomy chapter 5. Deuteronomy chapter 5. Look with me at verse 32. Deuteronomy 5:32. We're going to look at a few passages here in Deuteronomy 5 and 6 and 7. Deuteronomy 5 verse 32. So you shall observe to do just as the Lord your God has commanded you. You shall not turn aside to the right or to the left. You shall walk in all the way which the Lord your God has commanded you, that you may live and that it may be well with you, and that you may prolong your days in the land which you will possess. Observe all the commands God has given. Don't turn aside to the right or to the left. Do what God said. That sounds like strictness to me. And God will go on, the Jewish commentators tell us, to give them 613 rules. 613 laws that he gave to them in the law of Moses, and he says, you do them. That sounds like strict parenting to me. Go to chapter 6 and look at verse 13. Chapter 6, verse 13, you shall fear only the Lord your God, and you shall worship him and swear by his name. You shall not follow other gods, any of the gods of the peoples who surround you. Now notice 15. For the Lord your God in the midst of you is a jealous God. Otherwise, the anger of the Lord your God will be kindled against you, and he will wipe you off the face of the earth. You remember the comment earlier about the belt? God has a huge belt. This reads like strictness to me, doesn't it? Look at chapter 7. Chapter 7 and verse 9. Know therefore that the Lord your God, he is God, the faithful God, who keeps his covenant and his loving kindness to 1,000th generation to those who love him and keep his commandments. God says, I will love and bless you to the 1,000th generation. Isn't that love? Isn't that mercy? How much love is it? The 1,000th generation to those who love me. But Verse 10, but repays those who hate him to their faces, to destroy them. He will not delay with him who hates him. He will repay him to his face. Therefore you shall keep the commandment and the statutes and the judgments which I command you today to do them. Strictness. God demanded obedience from his people, but he loves his people, and he would bless them to 1,000 generations if they would do the things that he tells them to do. There's no contradiction in these ideas. Parents, we must be strict. We must set boundaries and give rules to our children. But we do that because we love them. We do that because we are trying to protect them. If our children are not taught to respect our authority as parents, they will not respect God's authority either. Now I want to say something to the children. Let me talk to you for just a moment. I love it. All the little heads popped up. That's great. I love the way your children listen to my sermons and Joe's sermons. It is not unusual for us to get texts that say, hey, my 9-year-old said this after your sermon Sunday. That's amazing. We love to hear that. It's encouraging to us. God bless you, parents, for helping them listen and learn. Okay, back to the text. Children, let me say something to you. Your parents love you. They love you with a love that you will not understand until you have children of your own. Their strictness is born out of their love for you. So you obey your parents. Not because it's fun, but because it's right. Ephesians 6:1 says, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. It is the right thing to do for children to obey their parents. And deep down, you know it's right, because deep down, you know your parents are right. You know they love you. You know that they're just trying to keep you safe. And you may not fully understand all of their reasons now for the rules that they give you, for the answers that they give to you, and the strictness that you feel. But one day you will, and you will appreciate your parents for what they did to you. But children, you need to learn something from this. You do what your parents tell you to do. You obey your parents because it's right. And you need to learn that sometimes God will make demands of you that you don't like, but you do it anyways because God is right. We do what God tells us to do, no matter what we think about it. Whether we like it or not, whether it makes us smile or makes us frown. God said it, it's right, so we obey God. You learn that by obeying your parents. In Deuteronomy chapter 6 and verse 24, kids, I'd love it if you would look at this if you have your Bible open. Deuteronomy 6 and verse 24, Moses says that the Lord commanded us to observe all these statutes, to fear the Lord our God for our good always and for our survival as it is today. God gave them the rules. He gave them the strictness because it was for their good. It was for their benefit. God didn't ask them how they felt about it. He didn't ask them if they liked his laws or not. His laws were his laws, and he expected his laws to be obeyed. And children, we learn that from our parents. And when we learn it through our parents, we apply it to our relationship with God. Frankly, beloved, I don't like it when God tells me I have to love my enemies. But God said it, and it's right, and I must do it. And there's other commands that are given to me as a child of God that I don't particularly care for, but God said it, and it's right, and I must do it because God knows better than I do. All right, let's talk about a second value that we need to teach our children. And that is that we need to teach our children the value of humility. The value of humility. This may be one of the more challenging values that we have to teach our children for a couple of different reasons. One of the reasons is it is so unusual for us to be humble ourselves and therefore teach someone else how to do it. It doesn't come naturally. But it's also difficult to teach humility because the culture around us does not encourage this trait. Teaching humility, though, will lead our children to gratitude, to contentment, to appreciation. We all remember, those of us who are a little bit older maybe, I didn't say that. I didn't say that. I remember this when I was a kid. But if you're older than me, you definitely remember this. I remember hearing my parents say something like, you eat that food that's on your table. There's starving kids in China. You know, there's starving kids. I mean, I hear Joe talk about it. There's starving kids in Africa. You better eat that food. He doesn't say that to me, but we've all heard that, right? And that's an old school way of teaching gratitude, teaching humility. Humility is the virtue that Jesus displayed. You remember Matthew chapter 11 and verse 29 when Jesus said, "Come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden, take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am meek and lowly, humble in heart." I am humble in heart. And we remember Philippians 2 and verse 8 where Paul wrote that Jesus humbled himself And he became obedient to the point of death, even death on the cross. So how do we teach humility to our children? Let me suggest a few things. Give them chores to do. The kids' faces, no. Give them chores to do. Humility and hard work go together. Dr. Leonard Sachs is a medical doctor and a psychologist who teaches biblical ethics and values. And he has a wonderful book called The Collapse of Parenting. I've read this book cover to cover 3 times. I would heartily recommend every word of this book. It's not an overly religious book, by the way, but it is a very good book. He says, require your kids to make their beds, wash the dishes, mow the lawn, feed the pets, set the table, do the vacuuming. By exempting your child from all chores, as many affluent American families now do, you are sending the message, your time is too valuable to be spent on menial tasks, which easily morphs into the unintended message, you are too important to do menial tasks. And that unintended message puffs up the bloated self-esteem that now characterizes many American kids. Dr. Sachs is a family doctor who has an emphasis on children. And he talks about things that he has seen in his practice. He recommends parents give chores to the children, teach them to do these things, because you, when you do these things, are contributing to the functioning of the family unit. There are a lot of things that must be done to make a house run properly. There are a lot of things that must be done to keep the house clean and keep everything in order. And he says, get the kids involved in those things because it teaches them that you have a role to play in this family, that you can help this family get the things done that it needs to get done. Humility and hard work go together. Here's something else that we can do with our children. We need to talk to them about their social media use. Now, I'm not launching into a sermon about the dangers of social media or anything like that. But let's highlight this, and I don't think we can dispute this. Social media is really often nothing but self-aggrandizement and self-promotion. So I'm going to jump on Instagram and I'm going to post pictures of what I'm eating for dinner tonight. Folks, nobody cares what you're eating for dinner. Or I've got this new cute outfit and I'm going to post a picture of myself on Instagram so everybody can see how cute I look in my new outfit. What is that? It's self-promotion. It's selfishness. It's trying to get all of the attention. Here I am. Look at me. All eyes on me. Surely, beloved, we can see the problem with this for a Christian. So talk to them about their social media use. How are they using it? What are they posting? What are their friends posting? If, like so many children, if our children are only focused on how many likes they get, how much attention they receive on social media, we need to really do some reevaluating about their self-esteem and how they are perceiving themselves. Maybe they've got a little bit of a bloated self-esteem and we need to bring them back down to earth a little bit. We need to teach them humility. Social media does not teach humility. It doesn't. It teaches the very opposite of that. I'm not saying you can't use social media. I'm not saying it's all bad. I know there's good things. I get it. But generally speaking, social media is about me. Social media. Third, teach them humility by teaching them to fail. It's okay to fail. But we want to raise winners. Okay, to a point, I understand that. But if we shelter our children and we never let them fall on their face, then they don't learn how to fail. They don't learn how to lose. Failure can be a good thing. It creates determination to improve, but it also fosters humility. I'm so troubled by this thing that started when I was a child, this youth sports mentality where everybody gets a trophy. You know, it's like, hey, look, Johnny's Little League baseball team, you guys were 0-14 and you all had a batting average of 31, but hey, you're winners and you get to share the championship trophy with the team that went 14-0 and just crushed everybody because we're all equal here. Or even better, well, we don't keep score in this league. We don't do that, but everybody gets the participation trophy and all of that other kind of nonsense. We got to ensure that no one ever gets their feelings hurt, right? Man, if there's a box that we could stand on today, it's that one. Everybody's offended at everything now. And my generation was the test case on this approach. And now, because of that, not only that, not just participation trophies, that wasn't the only thing that led to this, but frankly, my generation of people, we have millions of adult babies who are soft and weak. Respect for authority and humility work together, interestingly enough. The Bible even says this. Go with me to 1 Peter chapter 5. 1 Peter chapter 5. I want you to notice a connection of these two values. 1 Peter 5, look at verse 5. You younger men, likewise, be subject to your elders. Respect for authority. And all of you clothe yourselves with humility toward one another. For God is opposed to the proud, but gives grace to the humble. These two things work together. It takes humility to show respect to someone who's in authority. Pride says, well, I'm not going to show any respect to that person. I'm not going to respect his or her authority. I'm not going to show them the honor I'm not going to do that. They don't know what they're doing anyways. I know better than they do. That's pride speaking. And pride will not let us respect the authority of others. But humility will. So we need to teach these two values. All right, I'm going to go to the third one very quickly. And that is that we need to teach our children about self-control. Teach them about self-control. There's a handful of New Testament passages that speak about self-control. It's mentioned among the fruit of the Spirit in Galatians chapter 5 and verse 23. It's listed as one of the Christian graces of 2 Peter 1 and verse 6. And in 2 Timothy chapter 3, there are evil men whom Paul discusses there. And he says that these evil men have certain character traits. And one of them is that they are said to lack self-control. They just do whatever they want to do with no accountability. But parents, part of our task is to instill a sense of meaning in our children, a sense of purpose, guiding them in a direction. Meaning and purpose provide that direction and that path that we should choose, and direction creates discipline. Our minds and our bodies they have desires, some of which are good and noble, others of which are evil. But children have no idea how to use those desires. Especially young children, they have no concept of how to restrain desire. And so as parents, we try to educate their desire. We try to teach them that there are things in life that are good and better, and there are some that are important, and there are other things that are lesser and things that are unimportant. And so we try to teach them to enjoy the things that are higher, the things that are better, and help them distinguish between what is good and what is bad, between what is worthy and what is worthless. As young children, if you asked your children, what do you want to eat tonight? What would they say? Pizza, candy, soda. Like they would always choose the junk food when they're very young. And so we try to educate that desire. And we say, well, you can't eat those things all the time. Those are special treats that we can have occasionally. But, man does not live on candy alone. And we can't just eat junk food all the time. Let's eat something better. And the next time you have a sweet treat like that, well, you'll enjoy it even more. That's educating their desire. That's teaching them that we can't always just gratify ourselves with what we want right now, but that we must postpone that gratification, that we have to delay that a little bit, that there's a better choice, there's a better alternative out there. And so we talk to our children that spending all of our time on Instagram or TikTok or playing video games is really not the best way to spend time. There's a place for those things, but we can't spend all of our time on those things because it becomes wasteful. And there's better things, more constructive things out there that we should be participating in. The cultural idea that we should just do whatever makes us happy, and that if it feels good, do it. Those are the statements of undisciplined fools. Those are the statements and the mantras of life that get us into trouble. So we train them in self-control in the early years. And we do that so that as they learn how to educate their desire, how to restrain their desire, if they learn how to do that in the early years and as they grow, it will help them resist temptations that come in the later years. Do whatever you do, or do whatever you want to do. If it feels good, go for it. That kind of approach is going to get them in a lot of trouble when it comes to that party that they're invited to when they're a teenager, and the drinking that takes place at that party, and the fornication that follows that party. So we educate their desire. We teach them how to control their desires. We teach them to choose the better instead of choosing the worse. So parents, time moves quickly. Make the most of the time, Paul said. Take advantage of every moment that we can, because we really don't have as much as we might think. If we teach these values to our children, if we provide strict, loving boundaries, and if we teach them humility and self-control, there are some parents who might think, yeah, but if I parent like this when my child is at home, when they leave home, they're going to rebel and they're going to go off the deep end because I was just too rigid and I was too... There's been studies about that. The data doesn't support it. The data suggests that children tend to follow in the path that their parents put them on, generally speaking. But you know what I love even more than the fact that data of scientists suggests that? The Bible says it. Train up your child in the way that he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. Generally speaking, children follow the path that their parents set them on. It's a proverb. It's a general truth. It's not always true. I understand that. But generally speaking, Proverbs 22 and verse 6 is right. It confirms what we see in our world. Kids who are taught to work hard tend to be adults who work hard. Kids who are taught to control their desires tend to be adults who do the same. Kids who are taught to respect boundaries tend to be adults who respect boundaries. And parents, we must instill these values in the early years. So, if you have teenagers, if you don't have teenagers, Joe's got a great lesson for you next week. If you don't have teenagers, you might think, well, that's a lesson for those who do. No, it is a lesson for you. It's a preparatory lesson to help you prepare for that time. It'll be here before you know it. I appreciate your attention this morning. There may be someone here who's ready to become a child of God, to put on Christ in baptism, rising to walk in newness of life, sins forgiven, holy to the Lord. We want you to do that this morning. We encourage you to take that step and do that. You can come to the Lord. You can come to Him as you are, as we're about to sing. And He can make you whole. We invite you. Please come as we stand and sing together.